Good morning, and welcome to Part 1 of Digital Literacy Basics, the second in Innovative's new Hot Topics line, our complimentary Beyond the ILS trainings for practicing professionals. I'm Nanette Knott, a senior consultant here at Innovative, and I've been here since March, where it's been my job to help the experienced librarians, trainers, and consultants extend our offerings beyond teaching you about your system and the unified workflows it supports to the other practices that you do through your system and in your library. I've had a great time doing it so far, talking with users, working with MLIS educators, and my colleagues in and around library land, researching today's hot topics and in-demand skill sets. In fact, one of our instructors today, Barron Becker of SJSU, is one of those MLIS educators. Digital literacy itself, which Barron will be talking about today, has been in the news a lot lately, what with all the fake news conversations and the like. And in just a few minutes, Barron will take us beyond the surface comments and the news cycle commentary into the deeper, richer world of this key service we as libraries provide our patrons and communities, digital literacy education. We're joined today by my colleague and fellow senior consultant here at Innovative, Jean Berard, who will act as our chat moderator throughout the session. And speaking of about the session, a few logistics before we get started. This is intended to be a conversation, as best we can do in the webinar format, and I noticed we had a comment in chat. So yes, all microphones are muted as part of this session, but please chat with us, and I see we have some chatting now. As you have questions throughout the series, as Barron is presenting, chat your questions. Jean's there to monitor. She'll inject them at breakpoints and at question points. And speaking of question points, there will be a number throughout the series. There'll be a question posed by Barron, and we hope that you'll chat your responses and questions at those times as well. I wanted to mention that this is a series in two parts. Today, we're going through the good to knows, we'll debunk some of the myths, we'll start with the basic principles, and next Tuesday, the 17th, at the same time, we'll get together again, and we'll work on getting started with digital literacy in your library and setting a foundation for the future. I'll include a link if you haven't already registered for the second session in my email when I send the recordings out tonight. So we'd like to practice the chat process. Some of you have already started with where you're logging in for today, where you're logging in from today, and clearly I picked up this slide and failed to change it back because we're still in session 1. So you can get a preview of the question that will happen in session 2. So Jean, with that, do we have folks chatting?
Yes, we do.
All right, looks like folks are joining us from Texas, London. Great. Well, I don't want to take too much of Barron's time with introductions, so I'll go ahead without further ado and pass to our presenter today, Barron Becker from SJSU. Barron, it's all yours.
Thank you, Nanette. Yes, welcome everyone. As Nanette was saying, my name is Barron Becker, and I work at San Jose State University. I am currently serving as a liaison librarian, and I've been doing that since about 2009. And also recently, I've started carrying out some instruction at our library school, the SJSU ICE School, and I've been doing that since last fall. A lot of my work deals with teaching information literacy, so that's what I do at the ICE School. I teach an information literacy class for the instructors, and then as a liaison librarian, I work with the psychology departments and counselor education departments, and I work with those students getting their digital literacy skills and information literacy skills kind of up to speed in a very subject-specific format. So just give you a heads up about some digital literacy resources that are available. There's a really great author, Renee Hobbs. You can see on the left here, she's written 2 very useful resources, Create to Learn, an introduction to digital literacy, and digital and media literacy, connecting culture in the classroom. On the right, there's a couple more books that are available, Digital Literacy by Susan Weisinger, and Research and Resources in Language Teaching, Digital Literacies by Dudensi Hockney, and Pergram. So if, what we're going to be doing today is just kind of skimming some of the surface and looking at some of the myths and principles surrounding digital literacy. But definitely if you want to get deeper into the topic and see some of the larger conversations that are going on, I recommend those texts. So I want to first start by discussing a few of the myths that are surrounding digital literacy. The first being the idea that digital literacy and information literacy are the same thing. Now, a lot of this really depends on your definition of digital literacy. And while they are very similar, I personally take the stance that digital literacy evolved from information literacy. Digital literacy's roots are in information literacy, and there's still a lot of overlap between the two. Our traditional perspective of information literacy did begin long before the digital age, but from my current perspective, they aren't the same thing. However, I want to recognize that a person's definition of digital literacy may reflect their professional or occupational community. Another response someone might have to the digital literacy, information literacy discussion is that digital literacy is literacy. Here, a professor of design, illustration, and photography feels that digital literacy is the new literacy, implying that we could remove the digital aspect of our terminology because, and this is from his perspective, everything he does and has to know and be responsible for rests on digital literacy. This is an important aspect of digital literacy. Some people might consider it a novelty or a hobby, while others see it as their context is key to having a discussion about these aspects. I'm going to go with the ACRL on this one and stay grounded in their definition of these terms. First, let's look at defining information literacy. ACRL defines information literacy as the set of integrated abilities encompassing the reflective discovery of information, the understanding of how information is produced and valued, and the use of information in creating new knowledge and participating ethically in communities of learning. Okay, now let's look at the ALA's definition of digital literacy. Digital literacy is the ability to use information and communication technologies to find, understand, evaluate, create, and communicate digital information, an ability that requires both cognitive and technical skills. I think it's important to break down the similarities and the differences between these two literacies. Let's look at the core concepts of each definition side by side. Now you can see obviously digital literacy all revolves around digital information. And again, we have those ideas of finding, understanding, evaluating, creating, and communicating. In different terms, they are reflected in information literacy. The reflective discovery of information, understanding information production, and understanding information value, and using information to learn and create. They really are similar when they're spelled out like this. But when we look at the qualities of a literate person, we'll start seeing how the nuances become clear. The ALA has gone on to identify some of the traits of a digitally literate person. There are 5 sets of traits. First, the ALA considers a digitally literate person as someone who possesses the variety of skills, cognitive and technical, required to find, understand, evaluate, create, and communicate digital information in a wide variety of formats. The cognitive and technical emphasis here is mine, and I think this is a crucial element to the definition, and we'll look at this more closely down the road. In terms of functions, the ALA states that a digitally literate person is someone who appropriately and effectively uses diverse technologies to search for and retrieve information, interpret search results, and judge the quality of the information retrieved. Again, the emphasis here is mine, And I think these are the components that help contribute to the distinguishing features of digital literacy. The third aspect of a digitally literate person is that he or she understands the relationships among technology, lifelong learning, personal privacy, and appropriate stewardship of information. Here we see an aspect of context. There's knowledge about how digital information, yes?
I don't think, my slides aren't advancing. I'm not sure if anyone else's are. I'm about 2 slides behind. Sorry to interrupt. Oh, I think it's me, not you.
Yeah, this is Jean. I'm seeing the current slides.
Okay, so you're
sorry,
seeing...
I'll let you go back to it.
And participants are too.
Okay,
all right.
Thanks, Jean.
So I lost my spot. Okay, so I think we're at here. The third aspect of a digitally literate person is that he or she understands the relationships among technology, lifelong learning, personal privacy, and appropriate stewardship of information. And I was talking about the context. There's a knowledge about how digital information and technology can affect the big picture. Now, in terms of hot topics, this would be most applicable when we're talking about the spread of misinformation and having an understanding of using information appropriately. Can everybody see the slide? I just got an error message. And you can hear me okay?
I'm seeing the slide.
Okay. It told me that there was a pause. I think we're having a few hiccups here. So the aspects of a digitally literate person don't always focus on technical skills. As we see here, it's also about connections and using these skills and appropriate technologies to communicate and collaborate with peers, colleagues, family, and the general public. And finally, a digital literate person uses these skills to participate actively in civic society and contribute to a vibrant, informed, and engaged community. I really appreciate these 5 breakdowns of what a digitally literate person looks like, in that they show how information technology is integrated into the person's life, rather than just being a set of technical skills. So going back to our myth, I'd say that digital literacy is its own literacy. It's not the same thing, but digital literacy and information literacy can't exist without the other. The next myth that's floating around is that digital literacy is all about fake news. As I mentioned earlier, I teach a graduate course in information literacy and digital literacy, and it's not uncommon to have a student register for the class thinking it will all be about fake news. The truth is that information evaluation, which is the core idea behind the fake news discussion, is only a part of what makes up digital literacy. Having said that, I think the topic of fake news is an excellent way to get the discussion started when it comes to the importance of digital literacy. The recent election issues, news, and media stories on the importance of this type of literacy has got everyone moving forward and discussing the importance. Here in California, there's even legislation moving forward to get these literacies integrated into the school curriculum. Another myth I'd like to address is the idea that digital natives are, by default, digitally literate. In case you're not familiar with that term, digital natives is a categorization of a person born or brought up during the age of digital technology. In many ways, this leads them to be familiar with computers and the internet from an early age. The problem here is that being familiar and being literate are not necessarily the same thing. And this has caused all kinds of stereotypes for digital natives. It's also led to an unfair assumption about those who are far from being digital natives. And I'm talking about the older adults here as well. The truth is that everyone struggles with digital literacy. Younger generations might have the technical skills, but possibly lack the refined cognitive skills to find, evaluate, and create and communicate. Older generations might have the cognitive skills, but it's possible they might lack the refined technical skills to do these same steps. No one is born digitally literate, and no one's age will determine their digital literacy skill level. This also applies to everyone in between, millennials, boomers, Xers, Ys. As library and information professionals, we need to keep these stereotypes in check. And we'll see later, the general population across all ages have different issues with digital literacy. So I'd like to take a moment and ask the audience, how have you experienced either side of the older-younger technology myth? Have you found yourself being labeled or stereotyped because of your age or similar demographic?
Well, as people are waiting to chat, this is Jean. I think I can say that I've definitely experienced both sides of this. Being of a certain age, you have people who are older than you who have expectations that you yourself are more digitally literate than they are, and then of course you expect younger people to be more digitally literate than yourself. But I would say that most of us are probably, based on these evaluations standards, digitally illiterate. And I am getting some chats that agree with this, that we feel we're on the cusp. That's a very good way of putting it.
So, like I said, I work at San Jose State, and we have the traditional students, coming in at 18 years old, as just as well as the non-traditional who are coming in after a bit of a break. And I think what has happened was we've seen more effort at first focused on the non-traditional students, and that was assuming that the 18-year-olds coming in out of high school, the college, who are coming in as freshmen were more literate. And while it's true they might have had more exposure, it goes back to what I was saying. They didn't necessarily have the skills, and it was just really an unfair assumption to expect that they had these sets of skills and then try to teach them with that assumption, whereas they didn't, and that was, we had to kind of reassess our approach to working with the traditional freshmen, in that don't make those assumptions.
Barron, this is Nanette. I have two chats that came in privately to me. One that
Sure.
I'm older and struggle with this stereotype, and the question for how we overcome this. And I really like this one from Kathy Handy. She posts that as adults often put themselves down because of these factors. And so, that would be something that I think we do a lot. It'd be interesting to have you comment about that as you go further too, how we can help adults overcome these stereotypes in library.
Exactly. And I see that, I do work at the King Library, something I didn't mention. This is actually a hybrid library. So we serve as San Jose State's library, serving the university population, but we also share this building and our entire collection with San Jose Public. So I'm able to also interact with, the general public as well. And we used to have a merged reference desk where the university librarians would be answering and interacting with reference questions from the public. And I would see that all the time, a non-digital native or an older adult asking for questions about some of our resources, and they do, it would put themselves down. Oh, I'm old, this is all new to me. And I think a lot of that is just walking them through that that mind frame and saying, oh, it's new to everyone. You know, everyone struggles with this. And I'll do that with students returning, you know, non-traditional students, someone who's maybe taken a break for 10 or 15 years, saying, you know, this is all new to me. And I have to remind them, look, it's new to everyone, even the 18-year-olds coming in. This is new to everyone. We're all, the playing field is leveled in terms of digital literacy. So I think in addressing that, the librarian kind of has to come in as an information counselor and say, hey, we're all in this together. You can do it. The fact that, you know, you made it to the library and you're asking how to use an ebook, I think that shows a pretty decent level of digital literacy right there. But
I like
think
that
it's true
information. Oh, sorry.
Oh, sure, yeah. You like the what?
I like the statement, the information counselor, because we have someone else who mentioned that the younger students, because they're born in the digital age, overestimate their literacy skills because, right, they are natives. And so, right, that counselor fits both sides. I apologize, folks. So we seem to be experiencing a bit of technical difficulty throughout this session. So if you're having trouble, please chat me as the moderator, and I'll see what I can't do. I'm scrambling in the background to make sure that we keep our connections up and running. So I apologize for the interruption.
Oh, thanks, Nanette. And of course, if anything happens with slides not coming through or voice, that's fine. Just give me a heads up. And there will be more time for questions. All right, let's move forward. It's hard to talk about digital literacy and not address the issue of online learning. There's still the discussion that online learning is better or worse than traditional classroom instruction, and this isn't necessarily true. And even if it was, we would have to confront it because online learning isn't going anywhere. In fact, it's changing our instructional design and pedagogy every day. But like with many things, and especially many things with digital literacy, context is key. So online learning has the capabilities to be very effective. It can be incorporated at various times into a student's schedule. And the fact that most online learning software packages are also mobile friendly means that the instruction and learning can happen anywhere. Online learning offers repeated exposure to the information. So instead of a one-time lecture, the student can go back and listen to or watch the content until he learns it or until it clicks. And as I just mentioned, online learning is moving to be more and more mobile friendly. In fact, many applications and learning packages now have their own mobile apps to download to your phone or tablet. And most importantly, and in my opinion that is, online learning can be structured around multimedia content. Video, audio, images, and text can all be incorporated to create a learning experience that is beyond anything that could happen in a static classroom. I think one of the best examples of online learning is what is known as the flipped classroom. The flipped classroom is an approach to teaching that changes or flips how instruction and homework are presented. In this new model, the lecture is pre-recorded and viewed at home in an online video, while the homework or lesson activity is done in the classroom. It's a simple concept that allows instructors to observe students while they're applying the information they learned in the lecture. It allows instructors to observe any problems that come up with the activities and then provide immediate feedback and support. The flipped classroom is not an entirely new concept, but it's become formalized and studied since around 2012. The concept of a flipped classroom was born out of necessity. Two rural high school chemistry teachers were searching for ways to support their struggling students who regularly missed classes due to the amount of travel that was needed in order to attend sporting events and other school activities. The chemistry teachers experimented with video capture software and hosted their lectures online so that the traveling students could experience the lecture while they were away. Without having to spend class time on a 60-minute lecture, instructors found that they were better able to adapt the time in the class to adapt to the students' learning methods and styles. Like with many new approaches to teaching, there are a handful of positive and negative elements that go along with flipping a classroom. On the positive side, flipping provides more time for interactions between students and instructors while making sure that the students have continuous access to the material. Some negatives in this approach is that there's this technology requirement that has to be met by every student. And this will include a stable internet connection, and they have to have the devices or the equipment to access the material. Then there's also the issue of commitment. The student will have to commit to viewing the material at home. If not, then this model does not work at all. If the student doesn't view the material, they have to use the class time to get caught up on the material when he's supposed to be working through the exercises, and it just snowballs into the student getting left behind. Again, contexting is key, and in the case of online learning, the context might be the discipline or subject being taught. Online learning isn't the best scenario in every scenario, but every discipline is going to need to learn how to incorporate these aspects if it's going to survive the digital age. I'd like to hear from the audience about what subjects or disciplines they think could work well in a digital learning environment.
Well,
so
again, this is Jean. While we're waiting.
Hey, Jean.
Go ahead. I think that from my experience, really, I think most subjects and disciplines can be incorporated into a digital learning environment. As you say, I mean, all of the points you've made, in particularly the flexibility and the ability to go review, make all subjects a possibility for digital learning. Hopefully folks on the chat will chime in with their feelings on this.
And some of my experiences. Oh, sure, let's hear it.
So I have a note that they think, Kathy thinks that literature itself would be a good topic to incorporate into a digital learning environment.
Yeah, and also I've seen it work really well for a lot of technical elements and technical aspects, such as someone said, digital literacy or information literacy. Anything that has very technical steps in it works really well in a digital learning environment, and it comes back to that feature about the repeated exposure. So anything very technical or any kind of training is excellent for online learning. Again, because you're able to go back and you can work through the material. If you're demonstrating steps, that works very well, because then the person can watch it and do it maybe side by side while they're watching the technical steps. They're going to be able to carry it out on their own device. I think that works really well. But then you have subject areas like art. It's curious to think about how art would translate into art instruction into or maybe something like art history. Some things they're just taking a little bit of time to figure out, get a foothold in a digital learning environment.
Wow, I'm getting lots of chats popping. I like this one. Mathematics would be a good one, and it is steps, right? So mathematics, especially with our K-12 librarians working with a lot of homework help, and publics too, pulling that in. And then I have another suggesting photography would be the same thing. So this is great, getting the ideas popping for how we can interact with our patrons this way.
Excellent. Well, I think
that's what I have.
If anything else coming in, all right. Let's look at another myth here. Now, along those same lines, there's the myth that ebooks are better or worse than print. Now, I want to recognize that this can be a very touchy discussion. I would say argument. It's a discussion that can lead into an argument. There are fanatics on both sides of this debate or discussion, or like I said, a discussion that usually ends in a debate. And you need to tread lightly if you're finding yourself trying to debunk this myth. Now, research shows that context is crucial when learning from digital text. You have to consider the devices being used, the convenience of access, the length of the text, and the subject matter. So I've done a couple literature reviews on this topic, and it's really interesting to see that results change every year or two. Basically, people are getting more and more accustomed to reading digital text, and that leads to the results in their retention and learning are getting better with digital text. So continuous exposure to the technology lets our learning style and our learning approach adapt and change. But this isn't always true or as true for every discipline or subject area. And I think the most recent studies I've seen show that areas like history and literature prefer print text, while more technical disciplines prefer the digital. But here's where we got to approach the idea that preference doesn't always mean the same thing as adoption. So some people can prefer a printed text, but if the digital is more conveniently available, they will adopt the digital ebook. I think we see this more and more as libraries are adding ebooks to their holding. It's more convenient to log into a library's catalog from home or wherever you're at and check out a digital copy of a book that you want, rather than physically going to a branch, parking, finding, and checking out the book. Convenience can determine adoption, and we've seen this across the country as libraries have adopted ebooks into their catalogs, and they're seeing usage stats drastically increase. So I'd like to hear from the audience as to how their preferences or experiences have changed regarding ebooks. Have you grown to love them, or have you grown to hate them?
We're waiting on folks on the chat to chime in. Again, this is Jean. I think, you know, I have a love-hate relationship with them.
Interesting. Let's hear about it.
Well, I mean, I think you're right. I think that you know, the convenience. I don't want to have to go to the library, park my car, or it's, you know, 9 o'clock at night and I can't get to the library. Let's see what ebook is available. In the same vein, I still love me what my sister-in-law calls the dead tree book.
The dead tree book.
And I've got a chat. As a reader, I love that I can search within a book rather than scanning an entire index, which is a good point. And then licensing and copyright cause many problems for my students, though. And of course, that's definitely an issue with academic institutions.
Yeah, and we've seen that. Yeah, we've seen that at San Jose State. We started, as I was saying, how the ebook literature and findings changed so drastically. So we did a campus-wide study and found that everybody wanted, I mean, not everybody, but majority of the people wanted to stick to print copies. And then just a couple years later, again, as more and more exposure to the digital texts as that exposure happened, people were moving more and more towards ebooks for classes. And it goes back to, I think, because, as someone said in chat, those e-texts are searchable. So if you're talking about, again, technical books or textbooks, not necessarily leisure reading, that context of whether it's an academic book or a leisure book can definitely change someone's style or an approach to reading, and it kind of comes back to that context or that need. And then there is always the just the issue of convenience. I'm currently reading a book that's part of a trilogy, and I love reading the physical book, but I also just found out that the library has all three texts in all three books in this trilogy in one file as an ebook. So after I finish part one of this You know, in print, I'm going to go on to finish parts 2 and 3 in the digital, you know, the ebook version of it. So I think, you know, again, it's convenience for me in a lot of ways as well.
Yep, and the chat, we have seen this too, more requests for ebook versions now. So
yeah, especially when you get into that multi-user licensing options, that's so convenient. And you know, convenience I think is now starting to be a little bit more of a factor that they're looking at in ebook research. San Jose State has adopted an approach to our library will only buy, well, in most cases, will only buy multi-user licensing, meaning if you're not familiar with that, that means the books that we buy will only, can be used by any number of people at the exact same time. And public libraries have to kind of approach that a little bit differently. I think they go a little bit more for like 2 or 3 licenses at a time. You know, it just depends on the system, but context and convenience is key when you're looking at digital texts here.
Right.
All right, any more questions or thoughts from the chat, or should we move on?
Nothing else right now.
All right. Well, the last myth that I would like to address is the idea that you have to be an expert in order to teach digital literacy. Of course, that is absolutely not true. You have to go about your digital literacy instruction a little differently than you might think. But anyone can teach and train others in digital literacy. There are a couple important features that go along with this type of instruction, and I think, you know, speaking from a library approach to digital literacy, we approach it as instruction. Whether you're working with students or patrons or student patrons, you're walking them through as it, and I always think of that as instruction, whether it's during a reference interaction or a formal instruction setting. You must know your audience. Your instruction must be focused, and you have to learn to incorporate mistakes so that you and your audience learn together. I'll talk more about these features in the workshop, as well as the following workshop. But I definitely wanted to resolve this myth right here and now, is that anyone can serve as a digital literacy instructor. So that's it for the myths, but I'd like to know if there's any digital literacy myths that our audience have encountered, or any questions that you have for me at this point.
So nothing on the chat so far.
This is Nanette. I have one. I have someone ran into the myth that only smart people can use technology successfully. I think that's a good one. That makes me smile.
Yeah, see, there's all kinds of things built into that. So then if you're having issues with your technology, that means then you're not smart, that you're dumb. And that's so unfortunate. And I think those are these cognitive things that are just built into our, you know, our person and ourself and our thoughts about ourselves that really kind of work against us. And that's, you know, it kind of goes back, when I see that with a student or a patron, I address that. And I tell them, you know, no, that's not true, or, you know, it's okay. And it kind of goes back to that information counseling thing. Sometimes as an instructor, you know, you've got to, it's not just all technical skills. There's cognitive behavior, emotional things that run rampant when you incorporate technology into everything. There's a lot of stress and frustration and feelings of being dumb, and you've got to address that when you see that and speak to it.
I see it both ways here. I live rurally, very rurally, so I see it when, you know, from both sides. Oh, you live rurally, you must not know technology, right? Which then brings up the whole thing of, wait a minute, the guy that's running in this, you know, 3,000-acre field right next to me, on our ranch, he has as much technology as you do, because, you know, like my son drove combine, they're auto steer by satellite. Right? So you see it both ways, yeah. And it creates an interesting dynamic here. As you said, counselor.
Yeah, you've got to speak to that. That's an important role, you know, that we take from within the library that I think I'm seeing starting to get addressed more and more.
I don't see anything else in my chat.
All right, we can move forward. And of course, if anything comes up or any ideas, just throw them out there, and we'll talk them out. So in the next part of the session, I'd like to discuss some of the core principles that libraries can use to approach the topic of digital literacy. So I can't stress enough that we need to be careful about making assumptions when it comes to digital literacy. Age, race, culture, and appearance do not dictate any kind of digital literacy skill set. Every demographic has gaps in their digital literacy. And even if we focus solely on socioeconomic status, there will be areas where an individual is both strong and weak in their skill set. Digital literacy isn't always about the haves and the have-nots. This principle of assumption is important because we need to be careful about how those assumptions can shape our instruction or interactions with patrons. For example, we might assume someone doesn't need to know about X, Y, and Z because they're young and have a smartphone. So instead of physical or social demographics, we might consider grouping students and patrons by how ready they are to embrace digital literacy skills. Fortunately, the Pew Research Center did a recent study on digital divides and digital readiness. The new research examined the attitudes and behaviors in people's preparedness and comfort in using digital tools, specifically for learning. The study looked at 5 main factors: their confidence in using computers, their facility with getting new technology to work, their use of digital tools for learning, their ability to determine the trustworthiness of the online information, and their familiarity with contemporary education tech terms. The analysis shows several distinct groups on the spectrum of digital readiness. In general, about 52% of the population are relatively hesitant to learn in a digital environment, while 48% are relatively prepared to learn in a digital environment. This means about half your general audience is comfortable moving forward, while the other half is generally has lower levels of involvement with personal learning activities. They might have lower level of digital skills and a lower level of trust in online information. The research then went forward and broke down each of those cohorts into distinct groups. So for the 52% that are hesitant, about 14% of those are unprepared, 5% are traditional learners, and 33% are reluctant. The unprepared is a group with both low levels of digital skills and limited trust in online information. The unprepared rank at the bottom of those who use internet to pursue learning, and they're the least digitally ready of all the groups. Then there's the small group of traditional learners, and they're active learners, but they use traditional methods to pursue their interests. They are less likely to fully engage with digital tools because they have concerns about the trustworthiness of online information. There's a larger group, the reluctant, that might have higher levels of digital skills than the unprepared, but very low levels of awareness of new education tech concepts. They also have a lower levels of performing any or engaging in any personal learning activities of any kind. And the Pew Research thinks this is correlated with a general lack of using the internet for learning. On the other end of the spectrum, we have about 48% of the population who are relatively prepared to use online tools for learning. And the research has broken this cohort down into two groups, the cautious clickers and the relatively prepared. The group deemed the cautious clickers comprises of 31% of adults. They have the tech resources at their disposal, they have trust and confidence in using the internet, and they have a drive to put digital resources to use for their learning pursuits. But they have not waded into e-learning to the extent that the digital ready have, and they're not as likely to have used the internet for some or all of their learning. Finally, there's the digital ready, and they make up about 17% of the adults. These are active learners, and they're confident in their ability to use digital tools to pursue learning. They are aware of the latest educational technology tools, and they're more likely to use them in their course of personal learning. The digital ready also have a high demand for learning and use a wide range of tools to pursue it, including, to an extent, even significantly greater than the rest of the population. They pursue digital outlets such as online courses or extensive online research. This is all just a snapshot of the general population, and it's not necessarily connected to any other kind of demographics like age, race, or socioeconomic status. And the important thing to take away is that we need to start thinking of our patrons or our students in terms of where they are on the spectrum of digital readiness, which is reflected in attitudes and experiences, not physical traits such as age. So I'd like to hear from the audience. Where do you place yourself on the digital spectrum, and how did you get there? So let me go back to the spectrum. So, where do you think you are on this digital spectrum? And I mean, just the fact that we're in an online webinar, it's going to put you probably in the cautious clickers or digital ready. But there's been at points where we've all been either more traditional approaches or a little bit more reluctant.
So we've got one digitally ready individual because of my job more than anything else, though. And I think that might be true for a lot of attendees in this session. Digitally ready, but through dint of being the point person for my library.
Yeah, so it's your experiences that have pushed you into to being digital ready. Exactly.
Right, right. I myself would say I'm a cautious clicker. Haven't really dived in fully to online learning.
Barron, I have a
Anyone
question.
else?
This is Nanette. Oh, sorry.
Sure.
Am I on mute? Hey.
Nope, I hear you.
I'm digitally ready, obviously, but I find myself reluctant in some parts of my life that I don't let digital invade, right? And I'm almost embarrassed then when I need help with them. Like, I don't want my fridge or my stove to talk to me, right? There's those places where the digital invades my life, and so I'm probably like, I'm reluctant and recalcitrant as well. So I think that's right. It's issue dependent, if that makes sense.
Yeah. That's fascinating. I am completely reluctant and traditional, and I'd put myself in unprepared to start having the Siri and Google Home and the smart home like you're talking about. I don't want. I'm very reluctant, and I'll move into the digital realm and in that, for the home aspect. It's my work is so digitally infused. I do kind of need to, there's parts that I need to want to keep it traditional and unprepared.
Right.
It's interesting that those comments. Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, I was going to say a participant who's saying that they shun social media in their personal life, and I'm the same way.
Yeah, it's it's a spectrum. It really is, and it changes.
Yeah, I'm getting comments about boundaries.
Boundaries, yeah. And I think that's where
I know I got a
the boundary at the home. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, the first time Alexa speaks to you and you didn't know she was on, right?
Ooh, that's a weird feeling, right?
Well, yeah. I mean, during the holidays is when Alexa starts speaking to you and you go, oh, that wasn't even something meant for her.
Ooh. Boundaries.
Needless to say,
boundaries.
Yeah, boundaries. Needless to say, she's now turned off during family time.
It's weird. It's weird. And it's changing every day, and it's a fascinating topic of kind of what's going on, and everything's changing so quickly. But that's interesting about, just different contexts will, you'll be in different spots. And usually the people that we're interacting with in a library, they're going to be anywhere on this spectrum. And that's kind of what I want to go to next. So another principle to consider is that digital literacy behavior is driven by goals. So this, I think, ties in really well with reference services, because when you're working a reference desk or working with reference questions, you need to know what level of information your audience wants. What is their goal? So there's a fascinating study. It was, I think, 2015 by Michelle Decoteau and Serena Rosenhan. And they looked at how students carry out research. And I think what they found can impact how we go about teaching our users about digital literacy. So they found that behavior and search behavior is driven by goals. And they broke down learners into 4 different groups. So first, there's the Gen Recker, and that comes from general requirements. And this is a student or a learner who is driven by the minimum need or the minimum requirements. So this learner wants the quickest and easiest way to get the information. So they're not interested in learning all the ins and outs of a piece of software. Their digital literacy skills will grow in small incremental steps as they go through trial and errors in their learning. This is the type of person who might get frustrated with you if you try to explain how a program works, or if you show them lots of different features of a digital product. You've got to work with this person or this type of person very patiently and realize that the person might not be in a mood or in the space to learn anything beyond their immediate information need. The next type of learner is identified as a domain learner. A domain learner is a person who is driven to learn information about a specific discipline or practice. And he or she is ready to invest in the tools and the resources that are connected to a subject. So you might come across this person when you're working with someone who is, for example, interested in learning the different tools or websites available for doing like family history or genealogy research. They're going to be in a mode where they're driven to learn and make connections between digital products and features. Your digital literacy instruction in this scenario is probably going to be a survey of all the different genealogy services and resources that are available in your library and online. The next type of learner you might be interacting with is called the apprentice. Now, this might be someone who has a pretty good grasp of the information that they need, but this is where you can step in as the information specialist. So you're probably not going to need to cover basic terms and practices, but you can take them into some deeper exploration of features of a digital resource. Here, you'll spend less time teaching them the basics, but you could explain how a database is indexed and how to search with deep filters. You could walk them through the controlled vocabulary that a database uses and introduce them to some of the more complex search strategies. Now, the content of this type of digital literacy instruction probably wouldn't be appropriate for a domain learner, and especially not for a Gen Recker. But if you meet someone who's thinking in apprentice mode, you'll be able to take your instruction just a little bit deeper. And then finally, we have the learner whose digital literacy behavior is driven by what the researchers call a scholar. Now, a scholar is someone who's already an expert, and they're going to continue to build upon years of knowledge and contribution. So this person needs to know all the tools and the techniques that are available, and they're going to be motivated by advanced learning. It's with these kinds of interactions that you're likely going to learn just as much from the student or the patron as you are teaching him or her something new. And in this kind of interaction, you obviously could probably bypass all the basics and just launch into higher levels of digital learning. Each of these goals will drive someone's digital literacy behavior. So their goals will help determine the content of your instruction, as well as your pace and your scope. Digital literacy isn't always about being an expert or having to provide an expert level of instruction. You've got to try to tailor your interactions according to the person's needs or their goals. So I'd just like to check in with the audience and want to hear some scenarios possibly about when your goals make you a digital gen record, and when are you a digital apprentice or a digital scholar?
So waiting on the chat, I think this is Jean again, that you know, I will admit to often being a digital gen wrecker when I encounter something that, you know, you need to do this, and your sense is, you know, I'm going to need to do it once. So all I want is the basic requirements.
Just show me where to click.
Tell me what they are. There you go. Tell me where to click. That's all I want, and I don't need any deeper level of knowledge. And I think at times it's also overwhelming that you resort to that stance, even when there is a possibility that you do need to delve deeper into the software. But that just might be me.
I have one.
No,
this is Annette. Oh. Let's see. Coming in that, I'm sorry, now I have to read after I interject. That as a Gen Recker, when the drive for information is pushing you beyond the restrictiveness and the limits that you see starting out. So as a jumping off point when the need outweighs what you know.
Mm. I think someone's personal interests will really drive them from moving past Gen Recker into you know, higher levels. For me, that would be like if you've ever had to use like Photoshop. So once I start, you know, it's very technical, very difficult, and sometimes I just want to be, okay, how do I just adjust this filter or adjust the light? But as I'm more personally invested in something, and as a person is, I want to learn how all the tools then are starting to kind of be connected to one another, and how does this filter change this filter. So I do, you know, I see my own interests kind of, and it's those goals driving you to be, to learn a little bit more. And I think the important part about all this, why I'm kind of introducing this, is that's part of that information counseling or digital literacy instruction is really kind of gauging where it's not just all technical. What's happening cognitively with this person? Where you've got to meet them kind of where their goals are, and then walk them through that and learn kind of those boundaries.
So we do have some chats. Someone's written that they're a Gen Recker with regards to the newest social media app, they're a slower adopter, but patrons ask for advice on the apps. Oh. And when I need to learn about literature available for a module in which I'm teaching, I'm a scholar, but can be a Gen Recker if there's something I need to learn, but enthusiasm is lacking. And then I think we need to be careful about labeling someone a gen wrecker, as sometimes people will exhibit these behaviors, but need to learn in small increments and will become experts.
That's right. That's right. And these, like we're seeing, you can kind of be in different modes, just depending on the context and the need. But that is, finding out what their needs are and how they're approaching it is what kind of shapes, I guess what I wanted to put forward is that that's what kind of shapes how we go about providing effective digital literacy instruction, is really engaging with them and seeing what are their goals here, and what is it that they need, and what is it that they're open to learning and increasing in their skill set.
Right.
All right, so if there's anything else coming in?
Not right now.
All right. Well, the idea of goals driving digital literacy development is also reflected in this principle of 3 models of digital literacy. So this principle comes from the New Media Consortium. And this is if you've not heard of them before, they're awesome. It's a community of experts in educational technology that research emerging technology and digital trends. You might have heard from them from the Horizon report, where they look forward to start seeing what technology is on the horizon and how that might change, and how services that libraries offer. So along with the Horizon report, the NMC, the New Media Consortium, wrote a brief on digital literacy, and that just came out in October of last year. And it's they wrote it to try to help colleges and universities get a better understanding of how to advance digital literacy among students and faculty. So in their brief, they proposed 3 models of digital literacy. There's universal digital literacy, creative digital literacy, and digital literacy across disciplines. So approaching digital literacy in this way will help determine the content of your digital literacy instruction. First, we have the model of universal literacy, and this is the baseline set of practices that goes across the diversity of responses. So the universal literacy applies to learners and creators of all ages. So universal digital literacy means that people are familiar with using the basic tools such as office productivity software, image manipulation, adjusting, cloud-based apps and content, and basic web content authoring tools like Wikipedia. Since acts of creation and information seeking are social concepts, universal digital literacy teaches users collaboration skills along with basic critical thinking. So if you're deciding to teach content that falls under universal digital literacy, you're definitely going to need to consider your audience as starting from scratch. So in this type of instruction, you'll cover all the basic terms, concepts, and you'll keep the lessons focused on basic, simple steps. Next, we have a model of creative digital literacy. Now, creative digital literacy builds off of universal digital literacy, but it emphasizes the production or the creation of content. So the technical skills in this model are going to be more challenging ones that can lead to the production of richer content. And this might include video editing, audio creation and editing, maybe some animation, a better understanding of hardware and programming. This model also connects digital practices to online citizenship behavior. And it does this by expanding knowledge about copyright laws, online ethics, privacy, digital identity, security. For example, if you were teaching a basic workshop about social media tools, you could expand the universal literacy of how to tweet to now include the review of Twitter's user agreement, which explains that Twitter will immediately own whatever you post, and that they can even sell that information to other companies that will aggregate and analyze the data. Creative literacy isn't necessarily separate from universal literacy in the modern information age, but it's just a model that takes the learner beyond the basics. The NMC also identifies a model of digital literacy across disciplines. So think of this as infusing or embedding digital literacy into curriculum in a way that's appropriate and unique to each learning context. So, speaking from my position as an academic librarian at San Jose State University, this is the most crucial form of literacy for me. So there's no way that my library can reach each of our 30,000 students. However, I can effectively reach the teaching faculty and train them how to incorporate digital literacy into their assignments and their exercises. And by teaching the teacher, I can move agency away from a single library and into the different learning communities. And this model allows the learner to connect digital literacy skills with specific subject areas, and it helps focus the instruction. These models of literacy line up well with the models of learners we looked at earlier. The important takeaway is that you have to adjust your digital literacy instruction so it reflects the learner's goals. In an ideal world, things would line up nicely. But what about the times when your audience is a mixed bag of learners and digital readiness? So in cases like that, I suggest the best practice is always to teach to the lowest common denominator. So if a third of your audience is basic learners, then you're probably going to need to cater to them, but you can also provide advanced users with more like complex learning activities. So this is easier said than done if you're teaching in-person session where everyone's in the same room or space. But reaching different audiences at the same time is much easier if you're teaching online. In that sense, you can create more self-paced modules that you allow people to learn at their own speed. And we'll talk more about this in session 2. But I'd like to hear from the audience, any comments, and hear about what you consider to be some disciplines that seem strong or weak in the areas of incorporating digital literacy. Or are there subject areas that should focus more on digital literacy?
Waiting on the chat.
One of the, Barron, this is Nanette, one of the pieces while we're waiting on the chat to pop is embedded librarianship, or I like your word, infused. So putting that digital literacy in the skill sets that say if our healthcare workers need, or our researchers if we're an academic library need, or you know, that job support, if you will.
Yeah, yeah. And I've seen different disciplines changing over the last, you know, maybe 7 or 8 years. I keep coming back to art. Art is a very interesting discipline to look at from a digital literacy perspective, because some of that audience is going to be very, very traditional and very, very baseline in terms of their digital literacy skills. But art now is also including animation and creative design and all those digital literacy, you know, all those digital tools that require high levels of digital literacy. So I've seen here in our School of Art and Design that it is really a split population, and it's a great space for identifying some of those more certain areas of art that need some digital literacy support, and really identifying that, and then connecting with those instructors in those courses.
So on the chat, we have a comment that technical disciplines such as computer science have low levels of digital literacy apart from the creative aspects.
Right, right.
Which is kind of counterintuitive, isn't it, right? Because it goes back to your early part of the presentation, Barron, that we expect something which isn't necessarily true.
Right.
So courses that have more practical work have trouble getting students to read, and comprehension of concepts such as copyright is really low.
Right. And they might need, that's where the instruction can step in and show how copyright is connected to those aspects. All right, let's move a little forward. Of course, always open to hearing any comments or questions. So your digital literacy instruction also needs to be the idea that you're going to be teaching both cognitive and digital skills. Now I want to revisit the ALA definition here and focus on these two traits. So as we saw earlier, ALA defines digital literacy as the ability to use information and communication technologies to find, understand, evaluate, create, and communicate digital information, an ability that requires both cognitive and technical skills. The cognitive and technical skills are the fundamental skills in supporting digital literacy. You have to think of digital literacy as something much greater than just learning how to use software or digital technology. Think of the cognitive skills as something that's developed through teaching, while the technical skills are something that's developed through training. I call this the teaching and training approach to digital literacy instruction. The teaching, or the cognitive aspect, is addressed as you teach your audience about the technology. Here you're teaching the context of the information. You teach about the organization of the resource that has the information that they need. Here you are teaching some of the more universal concepts of digital literacy. Think of the teaching aspect in a way that you're helping the learner understand his or her own information need. And this is important because it sets the stage and helps a person put the technical skills in context of the information need. And you pair this teaching aspect with training. And the training is the technical instruction. And this is where you train the learner how to use the technology. You demonstrate and you train them to go through the process necessary to reach the information that they need. And this is the type of instruction where you're saying, click here, click there, click here again. So both teaching and training need to occur in a digital literacy instruction. You can't have one without the other. And this pulls together the cognitive and the technical. This approach to digital literacy instruction, it fosters experiential learning. So it facilitates information retrieval with knowledge about the technology. In this way, the user learns about the information while experiencing an efficient and effective way to use the technology to retrieve the information. Another way that I like to think about this, about the cognitive and technical aspects of digital literacy, is that it creates a double learning curve. So the person that you're working with is actually having to make progress in their learning about the information need as well as their technology need. So first, the person is going to have to learn the context of their information. So let's say, for example, someone has to use an online database to locate research in order to write a literature review. So first, you have to teach them about their information need. And in this case, they're going to have to learn about what a literature review is and what it isn't. They're going to have to learn about its components and the scope. And then right after that, either at the same time or very close to the same time, you're going to be introducing them to technical needs, where they're going to have to learn how to use the software. And in this case, it would be the databases. So with digital literacy, we find that a person is simultaneously having to process theory while having to process and learn technical skills. And this is what leads to a lot of frustration, stress, hopelessness, feelings of stupidity, or feeling overwhelmed. And I feel like this double learning curve is one of the biggest obstacles to improving someone's digital learning digital literacy skills. To a new user, this will feel like everything is being thrown at them at once, and that they might feel that there's no way they can process all this information at once and retain it. And it's that double learning curve that they're facing multiple obstacles all at once. So the way I address this in my teaching is to teach like a tutorial. And what I mean by that is you've got to, with digital literacy instruction, you've got to move slower than you normally would. Try to keep your lessons short and always include exercises that allows the person to demonstrate or work out what you just taught them. Also, always start with describing the goals of the instruction. You've got to keep them focused. Provide them with context, and then build off the basics. It's that step-by-step work. And usually with context in digital literacy, I mean help them understand what the technology is and what it does. So if we're talking about databases, when I'm working with students, I try to provide context about what a database is. They might know that they have to find something that they're looking for in a database, but I try to connect the idea of a database to something that they already know. And I find what works for a lot of our students here is the website IMDb. And it's a movie review website that a lot of people go to. And I asked them, do you know what the DB stands for in IMDb? And it turns out IMDb stands for Internet Movie Database. And a lot of them have used that before. So I tell them, look, you've already used databases. You understand what that is. It's just an organization of information. It just keeps track of things. It's all about connecting them to ideas of something that they already know. And that kind of goes back to helping them feel less lost, and that builds a little bit more confidence. Like, oh yeah, I know that. I know how to use that. And just start building off that to help get them focused on their digital literacy. And finally, you've got to provide information in multiple formats, which leads to this final principle. Prepare your digital literacy instruction or interactions to be delivered in multiple modes. So have your material be available online, provide supplemental handouts with printouts of your slides and showing the key concepts or the key steps. But you've also got to be able to deliver your instruction face-to-face. So each of these modes will require you to adjust the content to fit the delivery method. But this is a crucial step in delivering digital literacy instruction. You've got to be sensitive to the different learning styles and be available to kind of cater to each of them. So we'll build off these principles and put them into practice during the next session. And I'll show you the software that I use that's available for free and paid to do this. But I'd finally just like to hear from our audience about any other digital literacy principles you've encountered, as well as give you a chance to ask any questions or make any comments about the topic thus far.
So just one thing relating back to the last question when you mentioned about copyright and helping learners understand about copyright. There was a comment that says absolutely that they understand it better when you relate it to any of their own output. They start to realize the importance of copyright, which I think takes us back to, everybody's individual.
That's right, and I think if you connect it, the students I work with here, everyone's on Twitter. I'm personally, I'll go back to that reluctant. I'm done with that element of Twitter, but helping them see the FAQs and the end user agreement with Twitter, something that they're already using, is very, very eye-opening. And not that it's not bad, it's not good how they go about it, but just showing them they don't own their tweet. It's not theirs anymore. Twitter can do and sell and use it for whatever purposes. And Twitter doesn't actually hide that. It's in their FAQs and their end user agreement. But just showing them that one step will hopefully make them more aware of that with other social resources. and social other programming and that or other applications. So again, you're just kind of moving them away from or out of just how do I use Twitter to then a little bit of a deeper level learner. Well, let me be aware of these copyright issues for all these other things that I'm looking at and show them how to look those up. I think it's a great way to kind of foster that experiential learning.
Right. So we've got a comment that slower paced learning and providing ways for people to practice and absorb information. And we have struggled at our library with the term itself, database. Which,
oh, interesting.
Yeah, is interesting, isn't it?
I wonder, is that the person who wrote that, is that a public library or is that an academic library? Because we, here in an academic library, we have students who come up to us and they say, I have an assignment, and they show us the assignment requirements. So it requires them to get stuff out of a database. And, just even though they're students and that's part of their assignment, they don't know what a database is or what it means. It's, that's when you start picking up on that information, that's where you quickly adjust and be like, oh, I have to go a step back here and let me just put this all in context. Databases are subject specific or, they're a collection. And sometimes people come in saying, oh, can I come in and look at the database? And they think that the databases are here in the library. So we have to give, okay, let me take another step back. Let me give you the big picture here. Libraries provide access to databases. This is what a database does. It is very interesting. Digital literacy instruction is all about, quickly adjusting the content to quickly meet the need if you see that. But you will also, as you get more and more experience with digital literacy instruction, and we'll talk about this next week as well, you'll start seeing some of the same repeated comments and concerns, repeated questions, and then you can start building some supplemental materials with tools to help point people to those resources to answer those questions as you're building your own kind of FAQs issues and things coming in.
Right. So that comment was from a public library.
Interesting, yeah.
And that it's a follow-up that many people, by which I assume it means staff, maybe steer away from the use of the term database. And I have a comment.
What is the alternate? I wonder, do you have is there a specific term that you found works more appropriate, or you just describe it as something different?
I'm waiting on the chat for that. Sure. But I do have another comment. Sure. This has been really useful. It's put a lot of what I already do into context with the principles, but I've also learned things I hadn't thought of, like the learning curve, and taking people back to what they know and building off that. This will be very useful in my practice. Thank you. So.
Thank you. Yeah, so the learning curve, the double learning curve, I heard someone, I can't provide a reference, and I apologize, I didn't come up with that. It was something, and I want to say maybe during Stephen Bell, he was an online, he's an online education kind of expert about the context of online learning. And it was in a Stephen Bell webinar or presentation where that idea of the double learning curve came up. And I don't even remember if it was a presenter or someone in the discussion, but it rang so true that we've got to understand it's bigger than just the digital product or the software. So that's their one learning curve, how to use that software. But then sometimes you have to address the information need itself and then understand that your learner is trying to process two, and it goes back to the ALA, that cognitive and technical skills, and it's very, very overwhelming. And as we've seen, if you've worked with people in a library, it's very overwhelming, and you've got to just start addressing those concepts into your instruction. So I used to, in my own instruction, I used to just launch right into teaching students how to use the databases. But then I started getting more and more questions about the basics, like, well, I don't even really know what a literature review is. So then I had to sacrifice some technical instruction to focus on the cognitive need. You know, what is, to help them understand the basic need and then help them understand how that basic need can be satisfied by the technology. It's a fascinating learning experience. But from our end, but from the user end, it's like, that's where we get that, I am overwhelmed, I'm stressed out, I'm too stupid for this. And we've got to walk them through that and show them no, they're not.
Right. So in answer to the question about what alternate term do we use, is used instead of database, because most of the public doesn't understand the term database, and we have to explain it, and we are trying to find another way perhaps to get the idea across. And one of the other attendees suggested possible alternatives, one being online resource, another being specialized website.
Nice. Nice.
So,
or, yeah,
I mean,
resource that collects the information about this thing. Yeah, that's awesome.
But is there a possibility that if someone says they don't understand database, that they'd be even more flummoxed by online resource or specialized website? I don't know.
Well, yeah, I think that's where you quickly have to interject, okay, I'm going to throw in this one line of instruction here. Well, a database is just an online website that collects and focuses on collecting this kind of information. You know, you just quickly try to get them up to speed on what a database is. You know, sometimes I've even said, well, a phone book is sort of a database. You know, if you use a phone book, it's, you know, it just collects people's phone numbers. Well, this database just collects information about this subject, you know, and again, connecting it to what they know and let them build from that. Again, that's if they're in the type of learner, you know, if they're a Gen Recker, then it's like, just show me what the information is. It's like, okay, you know, but then I'll say, well, if you ever, you know, want to know more, you can search this database and try to at least keep the door open for developing their digital literacy skill set.
Right. So we do have somebody who commented that in our university library, I've recently taken to describing databases as searchable collections of journal articles and sometimes other types of material. Awesome.
Awesome. You're right. And you're describing it by its function and what it does. You're defining it and naming it by its definition. That's great.
So a question, how would you explain database to the public that doesn't use databases?
Yeah. Well, I guess I would just describe it as a tool. And like someone else said, maybe it's, you know, if it's an online, if it's in the form of sort of a website, it looks like a website. But I like what that other person just said. It's a searchable collection that keeps track of this information.
If they're used to catalogs, it's very similar. Well, that's true.
Yeah, exactly.
Relate it back to the catalog, yeah.
That's right. Catalog is a database.
Because hopefully they know what a catalog is.
Yeah, and if not, then you just take a step back and, you know, quickly adjust your approach. Yeah.
Well, or even a catalog that you have online, right, to buy clothes, to, you know, Amazon is a catalog. So and almost, you know, most folks know what Amazon is. I find it hard sometimes as a metadata geek to describe the library catalog because everybody immediately thinks of, you know, the old card catalog, which isn't quite what we mean when we're trying to get them into a database.
Yeah, yeah.
not that I don't love the catalog, I do, I'm a metadata geek, but I'm always searching for those other terms that help people understand that it's way more than just who wrote this book or what's its title.
Exactly.
So, any other questions, comments for the?
I don't have any, so we can probably move towards my last two slides, I guess, which Barron has up. So I want to do the big pitch for session 2. If you liked this session, please join us for part 2 next week, and I will be sending out an email. Probably not tonight, as I had planned, given that WebEx is being special. I will promise you that email tomorrow so that I know that I can hit it with the recording for this session, and in that will also be a link to register for session 2 if you've not already registered. In the coming weeks, you will also see that we post the recordings for all of our sessions on the AAA website at iii.com. That'll be coming up here in the next 2 or 3 weeks if you would like to watch for that. Right now, we do have all of these within a week after a session. They're available on YouTube in the Innovative channel. So if you just search Innovative Hot Topics or Innovative Digital Literacy Basics, you will come up with those on YouTube. I want to also promote the full line, oops, sorry, back one, please. That's okay. The full line of hot topics. So digital literacy exists as 3 that we're doing for the next year on individual competencies. So digital literacy basics, project management basics, and mindful leadership, which is a new one that we're starting in December that we're pretty excited about. They all repeat again in April, May, and June. And they repeated at different times. So for colleagues that you have that might like to attend, those in the spring are at 10. These are at 7 Pacific time. And then this winter, we're going to jump into the institutional competencies and places that library is doing a lot of change at the moment with engagement, metadata management, and usability. And we do have done usability once in August. It was our initial hot topic, and that is available on the YouTube channel now with Rebecca Blakeson, and they all follow the same format that Barron has used today. Session 1 is your basics and your myths. Session 2 is how do we start to bring these competencies into our library. And now we can go to the next slide. And if you want to delve deeper into these and related topics in the technical skills and the business skills of library today, we have our boot camps. They are available for sign up. We're just finishing our first metadata boot camp. So we took the topics of the catalog, obviously, as I just mentioned, linked data, all those pieces that are impacting us right now, and we dove in for 6 sessions in a deep dive, a boot camp to prepare you for the changes that are coming. We'll be delving into actually the copyright cycle, which is the knowledge economy boot camp, so the piece that we talked about a little bit today in November and December. Then we move into content itself, so the insides of those electronic resources we've talked about today, their basic points, how they connect. And yes, we do address databases in there as well as ebooks and other electronic content like institutional repositories. And then we close out our sessions with the Business of Library Bootcamp. So the changes in the services mixes that you're seeing in your library. And we take that mindful leadership, sorry, I said we close out. We are offering a leadership and staff development boot camp as well. We do consulting on any of the topics that you see in our hot topics or our boot camps as well. And if you want to move to the next slide. I wanted to show you where you can register and find out what all of our topics are. We've just released this on our III site to make registration easy, and I don't know that we had all of these when you registered for this class, if you registered for this class in August. So if you go to III.com and you pull down, as you see in that first back panel, you pull down workshops, you'll get to a full workshop calendar that's out for a rolling 12 months to help you budget. That's what you see in the second slide. And when you click on one of them, you get a pop-up for how to register. Be they free or paid classes, you can register here through this single interface, seeing them all interrelated. And you can now pay for paid classes online if you want, or request billing directly as you've done in the past. And our last slide today
Oops, that's the last one I've got.
That was slide. Okay, so I had one more. Sorry, it was a day of technical difficulties for me. The last slide just says, please contact us. You'll have our contact information in the emails that I send tomorrow with your recordings. If you have questions, if you have things that you would like to see in the future sessions, if you have hot topics that you don't see here that you would like to see, we're quite interested as we launch these new Beyond the ILS trainings. Please talk with us. I'm happy to have a call with anybody that wants. I know Jean would love to get email, and I'm sure Barron would love to have feedback. So that's what we're here to do. Please continue talking with us. We had a great chat today. And with that, I will end the session and say I really hope to see you next Tuesday. And have a great week.